Death is something that lingers over us at every moment of our lives. It's something that all of our paths will eventually come to, and each person reacts to that reality rather differently. Some will attempt to leave a legacy, something that future generations will use and remember them by. Some will take their time to smell the roses, enjoying every smell, taste, and touch they can experience. And some will do everything they can to deny death its natural right. Necrobarista is a highly stylized visual novel that came out on Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020 on the PC, PS4, and the Nintendo Switch for the full price of $19.99. It follows a series of characters around a single coffee shop, but a special one at that. One that involves the forces beyond our control, and also sentient robots, very illegal drinks, and maybe a ritual here and there. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the developer for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So let's start with the plot basics. Maddie and Che are two people who run a local cafe known as The Terminal, which isn't like your local Starbucks. Sure, you've got your businessmen, your students, and even children who walk through its doors for a sip of Java. But the Terminal customers may be a bit different under the surface. Sure, you've got your oddities like Ashley, the young genius with a cybernetic arm. But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to those who are passing over, aka the recently deceased, like the young Keyshawn. It's unclear what exactly makes the Terminal this special location at first, and why the recently deceased need to grab a bite to eat or drink at all. But the game slowly reveals little details and allows the player to put two and two together to understand how some of this world works. Well, mostly. The game does keep some of the elements hidden to make it a little mysterious as well. So regulars on the channel are probably going, oh great, another game in the vein of Valhalla and Coffee Talk, right? You serve beverages to customers, learn about their stories, yada yada yada. Yes, we know you like this, Dragnix. Well, hold your horses there. While the game definitely pays tribute to those games in the genre, I see those red comment references there, writers, it's definitely a bit different than those games, as the focus is a lot more on the cafe owners and less about the clientele. Sure, Jill, for example, played huge parts in the story of Valhalla, but Necrobarista is very much a story about Maddie and the people around her, specifically around her. Maddie as a character is feisty yet intelligent, a definite smart aleck that I most definitely relate to, but has several layers under her surface. She's vulnerable yet determined. She's independent yet needs help from those around her. She's really a series of contradictions that makes her a reasonably interesting character that serves as the person that you want to relate to. Someone who most everyone will see themselves in without it being a generic protagonist. Despite the fact that she dabbles in necromancy. Did I not mention that she dabbles in the dark arts? That may be a little different for people to relate to though. The personalities that are put across from her do well to bring out her particular quirks while not being subservient to her overall story, such as Ashley, the kid whiz who seems to be having problems at home and is constantly coming to the cafe to work on small projects and to cause unintentional havoc. This difference forces a contrast and a microscope on Maddie's own cavalier nature, forcing you to subtly think about how her scolding of Ashley can be applied to Maddie herself, even when it's not directly referenced in the story. Keyshawn's down-to-earth attitude, Ned's blatant bluntness, and Che's adventurous work ethic all play into that concept. And while yes, this is not entirely Maddie's story, it's gonna feel like it is with the way back and forths go here, even when Maddie's not involved, to be honest with you. I mean, she is the Necrobarista in a sense, so it would make sense that the story would be around her. As for the writing as a whole, I found it to be a good mixture of witty dialogue, fun scenarios, yet mixed in a meme or two in there to effectively tell a joke or two. There were times I smirked at a good reference, belly laughed at a good joke, but it was also able to make me tear up a bit at the more emotional moments. It's a good mixture here for a game that covers some dark material, so I have to hand it to the writing staff that were able to balance this so well without making one overshadow the other. It also creates side characters and stories that are interesting on their own, although you do find yourself really wanting more of them in the long run, especially of Ashley. The young girl does feel like a tiny Tina mold in some ways, but she's definitely her own character and brings a lot of personality to the story. That's the thing though, even the most basic characters here have some sort of mystery and angle to them that makes you want to know more. And not one of them do I consider to be someone to just skip over of the main cast, even though some do stand out a little bit more than others. Speaking of which, the game's story definitely embraces that supernatural element, but one of the great things about this script and its writing is that it doesn't 100% fantasize it. It's grounded in the realities of human emotion. For example, the concept of time being a currency that can be traded is presented in the plot, and it runs its parallels to real life with debt collectors, and the balance of the natural world itself. But it doesn't hit you over the head with those comparisons either, and doesn't try to explain it in multiple ways like I've seen so many games of this type try to do in the past. It lets its scenarios in and gives you time to think about it, but keeps the story moving along. People who notice small details in these stories will really appreciate the elements here as well, as the writing is clever and is able to sneak in things here and there without necessarily being a bludgeon while doing it. But let's be clear about something. I feel like the more rocky road you've had in your life, the more you'll probably appreciate Necrobarista's story. It's not that you need to drape yourself in misery to enjoy these tales, not at all. But the relatability of the struggles of these characters and how they get by things is the plot's biggest strength, and it can hit weak spots in your emotional vulnerabilities. Yet it's able to do that without feeling like a depressing slog. Sure, there are moments of doubt, weakness, and even sadness in this plot, but it never feels like that's the message that should be taken from it. It's always got a positive spin to it, and I do appreciate the game doing that without feeling too overly positive. One of the big reasons that the story can be so effective is how striking the presentation is. Let's make this clear, Necrobarista is not your typical visual novel. You don't have two pictures staring at each other with a text box at the bottom that doesn't change half the time. Nah, Necrobarista is a lot more cinematic in its screens, but still keeps the heart of most visual novels at the core here. You're not getting truly animated cutscenes, but many scenes have some small motion to help convey the actions of the characters. Sure, you do get static text screens from time to time, but even they've got something different to them, with a stylized picture in the corner, and more importantly, a placement on the screen. Yeah, that's right, there's no text boxes here, and yes, I know, other games have done without text boxes in the visual novel genre. Yet, Necrobarista feels like it stands out for this choice alone with the way they've used it. See, the developers used the placement and the size of the screen, along with subtle effects here and the text, to emphasize the emotion of the scene. A back and forth argument, for example, may feel like the positions of the words are coming out like a duel of the minds, while a subtle emotional moment may drop it all for the calm and yet sober tones that it's going for from its music. The game understands that the way it presents everything, like when to get the chords of the music to strike up to emphasize a point, or removing all sound and music to let a dramatic reveal be the only thing that strikes, is something that the direction the game uses super effectively to get under your skin. Conveyance is the key element here. When you listen to the OST, you'll hear a great varied soundtrack that ranges from high-energy music and gamble, feeling somewhere between a club remix and a battle song from a JRPG, to the smooth piano jumping in on optimism, helping calm and relax the listener while providing upbeat elements to liven them up. These songs are trying to get across certain emotions and feelings, and you can sort of tell that by the names. I mean, gamble, optimism, cat and mouse, almost time. They all are pointing to scenarios or feelings that they are used in, even when they are used repeatedly throughout the course of the game. Sort of like having familiar feelings appear during the game itself. Come, take a listen to the OST here and hear what I'm talking about. At this point in the review, some of you may be wondering why a lot of my critique hasn't used a lot of specific examples when talking about the plot. And I'm gonna get a little bit meta on you here. See, I'm going to recommend the game despite having some qualms that I will get to in a bit. However, those who are looking for validation on buying the game at a surface level probably watched the first few minutes of the review and said, okay, good, I can buy it. Or skipped to the end and saw the score and said, yeah, I'll buy it. You may think I don't know my analytics, or general analytics, but you'd be wrong. But for those of you who are still here, either you've beaten the game and want to hear more of what other people thought, you're someone who really wants to dive into it before committing to a game, or you're waiting for the yeah but part of this review. Here comes the yeah but part of this review. Most of my complaints for the game really all stem from one thing, and it's somewhat tied to the length of the game. Now, anyone who's followed me on this channel knows that I actually think that when it comes to modern indie games, you end up getting a lot more bang for your buck, and that many games are not priced well with its length, especially when it's undercharging for it. Let me be clear here. I do think that for the length of these two acts for Necrobarista, the price tag of $20 is perfectly reasonable for the strength of the game. With that said, where the game's story falters is its pacing, and in particular, it feels like a good amount of content may have been cut from the game, or it is upcoming in the story's free DLC stories. The game starts off very slow and detailed about what's going on, slowly revealing each of the items around the terminal, but at odd times it brings in new characters that never get mentioned ever again, or has subplots for a character that abruptly end. Now, one or two instances of this would be something that would be fine to overlook, but it's the end third of the game where it feels like half the subplots that could have been there get thrown out the window for apparently no reason at all. While I loved all the elements that were centered around the story, it really made me feel like I just read a book that had several chapters in the middle removed, and it can really lead to some real questionable elements when you go and look back at the story overall. You feel like you maybe missed something. Part of me wonders if that was the point. The fact is that the themes that this game ends up talking about, it would be along the line of what those themes are talking about for it to sort of abruptly happen like this. But I don't think this was purposeful. I think the fact of the matter is that the game did have some issues coming to the actual release date, and it had to be delayed a couple times. I think a decision was made, and unfortunately that makes the story a little less interesting and really makes me think, why wouldn't I recommend people to wait for all the DLCs to come out before purchasing the game? I mean, then you may get the entire story, at least what I think is the entire story. Now look, it's not like the stories are bad and there aren't side stories at all. I mean, for example, it does help that the game has these segments between chapters. During the story, certain words will be highlighted and it can be telling a secondary story by selecting them, giving you keywords such as Maddie, the Terminal, and Death. Then you go around using these usable words and resources that can unlock written side stories of past guests, such as a fisherman or a pool ace. It did help to flesh out even the characters who are here and made the cafe feel like an actual, well, cafe. One thing I do want to mention before finishing this review off is the options menu on the PC version of the game, which is the one I played. Your typical options are here in resolutions up to 4K and the sound sliders, which are appreciated, and the contrast and brightness settings are nice. But I want to note specifically the text options here. In a game without text boxes, these options are critical to making it so that everyone can see what's going on. And I really wish more games did this kind of accessibility to allow you to show the text the way that you want. In the end, I loved what Necrobarista brought to the table from a story standpoint, and its presentation with its close-ups, awkward angles, and willingness to play with the screen really helped to define the game and make it stand out from the rest of visual novels out there. While I do have problems with the game's dramatic pace change in the second act that makes it feel like several stories didn't get the conclusion that they deserved, it is nice to hear that there will be free DLC coming that may fix the issue. Keyword may. It is a world I love to revisit at some point, but it's a world that just is under those major visual novels that I recommend, in Enigma, in Valhalla, in Wondersong, even though that's not really a visual novel. In the end, the game earns an 87 out of 100, making the game a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and matches the game's specialties to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, then refer to this chart or the description below to find where the game's buyability score lies for you. This is one of those weird cases where it is a must buy, but maybe later on, and I'm making a guess here, as I mentioned before, that the content that's coming may be content that was cut from the original product. Again, the story is good, it's just that I feel like it could have been superb. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out for now. Again, I always want to get feedback, so leave your comments in the comment section below. I do take questions and recommendations on Discord, which is again in the description below, and I'm not going to ask you to like or any of that stuff on the video. I just want you to put a game out there that maybe you want other people to play. Maybe we'll leave that in the comment section below, or maybe a game for me to actually cover on a stream. Coming up next on review side, I am working on that Virgo vs. Zodiac review. It's taking a while, I know, but I keep on getting, let's just say, off track in terms of looking at some of these other games. But it's coming. Don't you worry.